I never imagined that drawing a single clear line would feel so lonely. We had been together for 10 years. A full decade of shared apartments, shared grocery lists, shared friends, shared routines. We met when we were young enough to believe that love alone could carry everything else behind it. Back then the future felt wide and forgiving. We had time. We always had time. At least that was what he used to say. In the early years I did not care about timelines or rings or milestones. We were in love in that intense, consuming way that makes the rest of the world feel secondary. We stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. We laughed easily. We fought rarely. When people asked where we saw ourselves in 5 years, we smiled and said something vague about together, as if that answer alone covered all the important details. Somewhere along the way, though, the question stopped being hypothetical. Friends started getting engaged. Then married. Then divorced in some cases. Babies appeared in social media photos, then second babies, then houses with fenced yards and dogs. Every milestone we attended together planted a small quiet thought in the back of my mind. Not jealousy exactly. More like awareness. We were moving forward in life, but not forward in direction. Whenever the topic of marriage came up, he never shut it down outright. That was part of what kept me patient for so long. He would say things like, "Of course I see myself with you," or "I am not against marriage, I just do not want to rush it," or "We are basically married already." Those phrases became familiar, almost comforting. I learned how to interpret them as promises deferred, not denied. So, I waited. I waited through job changes and relocations. Through family holidays where relatives asked, "So when is the wedding?" and he laughed it off while I smiled tightly beside him. I waited through anniversaries that were sweet but repetitive: dinner, a gift, a toast to us. Each year I told myself the next one would feel different. By the time our 10th anniversary approached, something inside me had shifted. It was not dramatic at first. It was quiet. A slow accumulation of unmet expectations and swallowed conversations. I realized I was no longer waiting with hope. I was waiting with resentment. I did not want another symbolic celebration that ignored the elephant in the room. 10 years was not just a number. It represented a choice, or rather the lack of one. So, I told him. We were sitting in our living room when I said it. No raised voices. No ultimatum tone. Just honesty that had been simmering for years. I told him that celebrating 10 years without a deeper commitment felt hollow to me. That I did not want another anniversary dinner pretending everything was fine. That I needed to know where we were going. I said I would not celebrate the anniversary unless he was ready to talk seriously about proposing. He did not get angry. That was almost worse. He sighed, leaned back, and said I was putting unnecessary pressure on something that was supposed to be joyful. He told me I was turning love into a transaction. He said, "Why does everything have to be so dramatic?" Then he added casually, "You know, I am not great with deadlines." Deadlines. That word stayed with me long after the conversation ended. As if 10 years together was just an arbitrary date on a calendar. As if my desire for clarity was a scheduling inconvenience. He did not ask why it mattered so much to me. He did not ask how long I had been feeling this way. He did not reassure me. He dismissed it gently but firmly, like you dismiss a child who is upset over something you do not consider serious. That night I lay awake next to him, staring at the ceiling, realizing something I had not allowed myself to think before. He was comfortable exactly where we were, and my discomfort did not outweigh that comfort. The days that followed were awkward in a quiet way. He acted normal. Too normal. He joked, made plans, talked about work. It was as if the conversation had never happened. Meanwhile, I felt like I was walking around with a crack down the center of my chest, trying not to let it show. I started replaying our entire relationship in my head, searching for signs I might have ignored. Every time he had deflected a serious conversation. Every time he had said someday instead of soon. Every time I had adjusted my expectations to match his pace. I realized how often I had compromised without calling it that. I told myself I was being flexible, understanding, modern. But flexibility has a limit, and I had reached mine without noticing. When I tried to bring the topic up again, he grew defensive. He accused me of threatening the relationship over a piece of paper. He said love should not need proof. He reminded me of everything we already shared: the apartment, the life, the memories. He asked why that was not enough. And I did not have a neat one-sentence answer. Because it was not about the ring. It was about intention. About choosing me deliberately out loud in a way that did not leave room for endless ambiguity. I started asking myself questions I had avoided for years. If he truly wanted the same future I did, why was it so hard to say so? If he knew I was hurting, why was that not enough to at least take the conversation seriously? The anniversary came and went quietly. No dinner. No celebration. Just an unspoken tension hanging between us. He seemed irritated, like I had ruined something that belonged to him. I felt strangely calm, like I had finally stopped pretending. Friends noticed something was off. A few gently asked if everything was okay. I gave vague answers. I was not ready to admit even to myself how close I felt to the edge of a decision. One evening, after another dismissive comment about me overthinking things, something clicked. Not snap, clicked. I saw our relationship clearly for the first time, without nostalgia or fear blurring the edges. I saw how much emotional labor I carried. How often I minimized my needs to keep the peace. How his comfort had quietly become more important than my fulfillment. I told him I needed space. That conversation was harder than the anniversary one. He was shocked genuinely. He asked why this was happening now. I told him the truth, because I had finally listened to myself. Because love without direction was starting to feel like stagnation. Because I could not keep waiting for someone to choose me when I had already chosen him over and over again. He promised to think about things, to reflect, to maybe eventually be ready. For the first time, eventually was not enough. I do not know exactly how this story ends yet. What I do know is that drawing that line was not about manipulation or ultimatums. It was about self-respect. It was about acknowledging that 10 years of love deserved more than dismissal. And whatever happens next, I know one thing with absolute clarity. I will never again make myself smaller to fit inside someone else's indecision. The days after I asked for space felt unreal, like I was watching my own life from a distance. I moved into a small temporary place with only the essentials: clothes, toiletries, my laptop, and a few books. I did not tell myself it was permanent, but I did not tell myself it was temporary either. The silence between us grew heavier than any argument we had ever had. He texted occasionally neutral messages asking if I was okay or reminding me of practical things like mail or bills. None of them touched the real issue. None of them said I miss you or I am afraid of losing you or I want to choose you now. And that absence spoke louder than anything else could have. I had moments of doubt, of course, moments where I wondered if I had overreacted, if I had thrown away something good over something abstract. 10 years is a long time to walk away from. Our memories were everywhere, in my body, in the way I cooked, in the way I slept, in the way I instinctively reached for my phone to tell him small things about my day. But every time I imagined going back without anything changing, my chest tightened. I realized that love should not feel like constantly negotiating your own worth. After a few weeks, we finally met to talk face to face. He looked tired, older, somehow like the weight of the situation had finally reached him. He told me he missed me. He told me he hated being alone in the apartment. He told me he had been thinking a lot. I waited. I needed more than atmosphere, more than regret, more than discomfort. When I asked him directly what he wanted for our future, he hesitated just long enough for my answer to form before his words did. He said he still did not like feeling forced into decisions. He said he cared about me deeply but was unsure if marriage was something he could promise anytime soon. He said maybe things could go back to how they were if we stopped pressuring each other. That was the moment I understood that he was not choosing uncertainty accidentally. He was choosing it deliberately. And I was no longer willing to live inside that choice. I told him calmly that going back to how things were was no longer an option for me. That I loved him, but I loved myself enough now to stop waiting. He looked shocked again, as if he had never believed I would actually leave the space he had always assumed I would occupy. Walking away hurt more than I expected, but it also felt clean, honest. For the first time in years, my sadness did not come with confusion. I grieved the relationship fully, not just what it was but what I had hoped it would become. And slowly beneath the grief there was relief. Relief that I no longer had to justify my needs or explain why they mattered. Relief that I had finally listened to the quiet voice inside me that had been asking for courage all along. I do not know yet what love will look like next in my life. But I know this. I will never again beg for clarity from someone who benefits from keeping me unsure. I will never again celebrate milestones that feel empty. And I will never again apologize for wanting to be chosen openly, confidently, and without hesitation. In the weeks that followed, I learned how silence can be both cruel and kind. Cruel because it leaves space for memories to echo louder than reality. Kind because it gives you room to hear yourself again. I filled my days with small, deliberate routines. Morning walks. Cooking simple meals. Sitting with discomfort instead of running from it. Some nights I cried without knowing exactly what I was crying for. Other nights I felt strangely steady, like I had crossed an invisible threshold and could not go back even if I wanted to. People started telling me I looked different, lighter. I did not feel light yet, but I understood what they meant. I was no longer carrying the constant low-level anxiety of waiting for someone else to decide my future. That waiting had shaped more of my personality than I realized. It had made me cautious, quiet, accommodating. Letting go of it felt like standing up after sitting too long. Painful at first, then relieving. He reached out again a month later. This time his messages were longer, more emotional. He said he was scared. He said he had taken me for granted. He said losing me had forced him to confront things he had avoided for years. He asked if it was too late. I read the messages slowly, carefully. I did not feel the rush of hope I once would have. Instead, I felt a calm sadness. Not because he was lying, but because he was finally speaking from loss rather than intention. I asked him what had changed. Not what he felt, but what he was willing to do. There was another pause. He said he was still figuring that out. And that was my answer. I told him I wished him well. I meant it. Then I put my phone down and let myself cry one last time for the version of us that never fully existed. Months passed. The world did not end. My life did not collapse. It expanded quietly. I made new plans that did not require negotiation. I said yes and no based on instinct instead of fear. I rediscovered parts of myself that had been muted by compromise. I realized how strong I was, not because I survived the breakup, but because I finally trusted myself enough to choose differently. Sometimes I still think about him. About the years we shared. About the love that was real even if it was incomplete. I do not regret those years. They taught me what patience looks like and what its limits are. They taught me that love without alignment slowly erodes you. And that choosing yourself is not selfish when the alternative is disappearing. If there is one thing I carry forward, it is this certainty. Love should not require you to threaten your own absence to be taken seriously. Commitment should not feel like a favor. And clarity should not come only when you are ready to walk away. I drew a line after a decade together. He did not take it seriously. But I did. And that made all the difference. Even now, sometimes I catch myself measuring time differently. Not in anniversaries or milestones, but in moments of quiet confidence. The first time I went to an event alone and did not feel awkward. The first holiday I planned entirely for myself. The first decision I made without mentally checking how it would affect someone else. These moments were small, but they added up. They became proof that my life was no longer on pause. I started to understand how deeply I had associated love with endurance, staying, waiting. Being patient even when patience hurt. I had mistaken longevity for security and familiarity for commitment. Letting go forced me to redefine what I believed love should feel like. Not anxious. Not conditional. Not dependent on how long you were willing to wait in silence. There were days when doubt returned unexpectedly, when I wondered if I had demanded too much. When I questioned whether timing really mattered that much. But each time I imagined myself years later, still explaining my needs, still justifying why clarity mattered, still hoping the next milestone would finally change things. And each time the answer was the same. I had left at exactly the right moment. I stopped telling the story of our relationship as something that failed. It did not fail. It ended when it could no longer grow. That distinction mattered. It allowed me to honor what we had without sacrificing what I needed. It allowed me to let go without bitterness. Eventually I met new people. Not immediately. Not desperately. Just openly. I noticed how different it felt to be with someone who did not flinch at conversations about the future. Someone who spoke in terms of intention instead of avoidance. I did not rush into anything. I did not need to. I had learned that being alone was not a threat. It was a foundation. Looking back, I see that the line I drew was never really for him. It was for me. It was the moment I stopped outsourcing my sense of worth to someone else's readiness. The moment I accepted that love without choice is not enough. And that waiting endlessly is not the same as being chosen. I no longer ask myself what would have happened if he had proposed. That question does not matter anymore. What matters is that I finally listened when my life asked me to move forward. And this time I did not wait for permission. There is a quiet strength that comes after you stop hoping someone will change. It does not arrive all at once. It settles slowly into your posture, your voice, your choices. I noticed it when I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. When I stopped imagining explanations that might finally make him understand. When I accepted that understanding is not the same as agreement and that agreement is not the same as commitment, I began to trust my instincts again. The ones I had muted for years in the name of compromise. They told me when something felt off and when something felt right. They reminded me that comfort is not the same as fulfillment, and that familiarity can sometimes be the most convincing trap. I forgave myself for staying as long as I did. I had stayed because I loved deeply and believed patiently. Those were not flaws. They were strengths that simply deserved a better place to land. Occasionally someone would ask if I was afraid to start over. I would think about it and realize the answer was no. Starting over felt less frightening than continuing a life where my needs were treated as optional. The unknown held more promise than certainty without intention. That realization alone felt like freedom. I stopped defining success by whether I was chosen by someone else. I started defining it by whether I was choosing myself consistently. Some days that meant rest. Some days that meant courage. Some days that meant saying no even when it felt uncomfortable. Each choice reinforced the truth I had once been afraid to face. I did not lose a relationship. I reclaimed my direction. The memory of him softened over time. The sharp edges faded. What remained was gratitude for the love we shared, and clarity about why it could not carry me forward. I no longer needed him to validate my decision. I had already done that work myself. If I could speak to the version of me who was still waiting, still hoping, still minimizing her own voice, I would tell her this. Love should meet you where you stand, not ask you to stay still indefinitely. 10 years is not too soon to ask for clarity. And walking away does not mean you failed. Sometimes it means you finally listened. My life now feels intentional in a way it never did before. Not perfect. Not free of uncertainty. But honest. And that honesty is something I will never give up again. I carry this story with me now, not as a wound but as a reminder. A reminder of how easy it is to slowly disappear inside something that looks stable from the outside. A reminder that love can be real and still not be right. And a reminder that clarity is not too much to ask for when you are offering your whole life in return. There are moments when I think about how long I stayed and I do not judge myself anymore. I understand her now. She believed in patience because she believed in love. She believed that time would eventually translate into commitment. She believed that being understanding would be rewarded. Those beliefs were not naive. They were human. What changed was not my capacity to love but my willingness to abandon myself in the process. I notice now how differently I move through relationships, even the small ones. I speak sooner. I listen more closely. I do not ignore discomfort just because it arrives quietly. I no longer wait for proof that I am allowed to want what I want. I assume that my needs are valid unless proven otherwise. That shift alone has changed everything. Sometimes I imagine an alternate version of my life where I stayed. Where I accepted another year then another. Where anniversaries continue to pass like checkpoints with no destination. That version of me feels tired just thinking about it. Not broken, just perpetually paused. I feel compassion for her and relief that I am no longer her. Letting go taught me something I did not expect. That certainty does not always come from answers. Sometimes it comes from exhaustion. From realizing that you have already tried every way of being patient and kind and understanding and that nothing has changed. That realization is not dramatic. It is quiet and firm and irreversible. I do not know what the future holds and I no longer feel the need to outline it perfectly. What I know is that I will never again confuse time invested with obligation. I will never again wait for someone else to decide if I am worth choosing. And I will never again celebrate something that asks me to swallow my truth to keep the peace. This is how the story continues. Not with a proposal or a reconciliation or a dramatic ending, but with a woman who finally stepped forward into her own life and did not look back.